In Focus continues tonight. Let's take you back to one of our leading stories. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana will deliver his midterm budget policy statement at a time when many South African households are stretched, with some also relying on credit to survive every month. Trade union Saftu says it plans to join a march against what they call an austerity budget outside Parliament tomorrow. The General Secretary, Zwelinzima Vavi, joins me now for more on their expectations. Dr. Vavi, good evening, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Jolie, and good evening to everybody listening and your colleagues that work there.
The midterm budget policy statement, amongst the many things that it allows us to do, government departments can apply for adjustments for their budgets, request additional funds for unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure, and so on and so forth. But it largely gives us a tone, or a fiscal framework tone, how Treasury perceives the current economic situation in the country, and what they think will be the performance of the economy in the next quarter, in the next year, and going forward. Now, economically, we are growing at 1% currently. There's rising unemployment, 42.6%, depending on which number you're looking at. Levels of poverty and inequality rising. You've got embattled public and municipal services. You've got ailing SOEs. You've got crime and corruption that is on the rise. Then you've got the issues that are challenges that Treasury normally raises. One, public debt. What is your view on public debt? Do you agree that public debt must be managed?
Of course, it must be managed, and public debt must be managed to the best interest of development in the country. It mustn't be used as an excuse to cut budgets and to deny our people their right to basic services that government is providing, which is currently the case with the government framework statement that will be made yesterday. We already sort of know what is coming our way tomorrow. We're not optimistic. We think that it's going to be business as usual. We think that the workers are going to come under a severe beating and attack by the Treasury as it embarks on what it calls a fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation, according to their own macroeconomic review trends, is basically a choice of a policy that says we're going to be slowing down on the spending. We're going to be not raising any taxes. We're going to be reining on the public debt, and we're going to be informed by what they call the government budget constrained worldview, and which the Treasury sees as the level of so-called government debt, of its servicing cost, and a danger to the country's fiscal, which they say they will rein on. Yeah. Is going to be a commitment to which is manifesting itself through the cruel budget cuts to social services, including cuts on healthcare, education, police, you name them all. Home affairs, nobody is spared. Yeah. Even the Labor Department, it means that they cannot employ more inspectors. It means that they must retrench staff in the CCMA, but it means that workers will not get the type of services that they should get from the CCMA.
How do you manage that? How do you navigate that path when you've got these three levers, right? Total revenue. People can't be taxed anymore, so there's not much that they can be able to collect from revenue, right? We're not comfortable with borrowing either. We're saying we're borrowing way too much, and we're paying way too much servicing debt as opposed to delivering services. So the only lever that is left is expenditure, and reducing expenditure seems to be the only option. How do you navigate that path?
Well, in our view, it's a choice that the government has made, that instead of increasing the taxes, the corporate taxes, that when this government went into government in 1994, it found corporate taxes are at around 51, 52%. In fact, At the highest point, the corporate taxes were at around 53% in 1993. It made a choice that it wants to cut the corporate taxes to where they are now. They are 27%. Just see how much resources they have robbed the country of by reducing the corporate tax rates from around 52, 53 in 1993 to 27%, where it is now. It is saying it is doing so because it wants to compete with the rest of the world. It says that it doesn't want to be above its peers. Its peers are the other economies that are developing. But when you look at that box, I'm okay?
Yes, you're still there.
What's going on?
You're still there. Go ahead.
Yeah, somebody interfered.
Oh, no, you're fine. Apologies there.
All right. So I was saying that when we look at the box as to really is South Africa way above its peers when it comes to corporate taxes, we found that South Africa is comparing apples to bananas. Yes, it is having higher corporate taxes to Kenya, to maybe Zambia and Malawi, but it is not above to its real peers in Argentina, in Brazil, in Mexico.
Yeah.
And so it is pulling wool on our eyes when it says it was to compete with its peers. That's our problem. The second problem is that government has simply rejected the calls made by all of us that in the context of this massive apartheid created inequalities, massive inequalities created by colonial era that lasted almost 400 years, it has to have a solidarity tax of some kind, a wealth tax, bearing in mind that South Africa's 1% richest is owing wealth of up to 45% of all wealth in the country, and that 10% of the population owns wealth of more than 90% of the wealth of the country as a whole. It won't reintroduce wealth tax or solidarity tax to address those inequalities. Hence, South Africa has now become the most unequal society in the world and doing absolutely nothing about it. Its monetary policies, driven in the main by inflation targeting, set very low at between 3 and 6%, means that government can only use the blunt instrument of high interest rates to keep that inflation within that band. And the cost to me and you and the economy as a whole is unmanageable. We were sitting at 11.75% real interest rates we pay for repayment of our bonds and cars and everything we buy through the banks. And they've just reduced it by a meager percent of 25 basis point, which took them to a staggering 11.7%. That's way, way above than what a developing country needs.
Well, they are likely going to tell us now tomorrow that they are, of course, based on the minimum program of action of the Government of National Unity 1, going to be investing in infrastructure. So they're saying there's a lot of stimulus that is going to come from there, close to R1 billion, or maybe slightly more, I'm lying, 934 billion rands that they're going to be spending or so. And there is, of course, a focus now on municipalities and making sure that infrastructure is properly taken care of, maintained, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of focus and support at that particular level. So they'll be saying, look, we're doing well. We're going in the direction of growth.
If that was to happen in a real big way, that will help. But the last time we had a massive infrastructure spend was in the run-up to the 2010. And that coincided with a crisis that was called the Asian flu in 1997. And South Africa was spared from the impact of that Asian flu precisely because of the massive investment it was making on the infrastructure in the run-up to the World Cup, the soccer FIFA World Cup that was held here in 2010. How we wish that they can return to those levels of expenditure, massive infrastructure, in particular human infrastructure, building bridges, so that our kids in the Eastern Cape and elsewhere do not have to cross roads and rivers that are flooded they don't, and so that people have proper housing in the rural areas. They have proper streets that have drainage systems in the townships that have been neglected during apartheid, Bantustans, and even now during democracy, so that they have community halls, they have places where kids can sharpen their skills for soccer, rugby, cricket, and you name them all. If there was to be a massive investment at that level, including renewal of the infrastructure so that we do not see what we saw in Johannesburg, which was massive fire that killed over 60 people, as well as the implosions that took place from underground because of the neglect of the infrastructure we inherited from the colonial era. So if they were to do that in a big way, we will smile. We will say that government at least is learning. But what we're really hoping for is a government that will say, look, politically, guys, there's a crisis. There's a crisis of representation. Our people do no longer regard us as their leaders. We have been elected only by 1/3 of the population in this country. The majority of our people have given up the hope that they can use their electoral power to change their lot.
Right.
And therefore, there's a danger that there will be an implosion one day. Because if people feel unrepresented by the political system, the next thing they will have to embark upon is an unled revolution. Now, we have no problem with the revolution that is led by the working class towards a conclusion that will see the creation of socialism in South Africa that will consolidate the power of the working class on the economy and the political systems of the country. But what we're more likely to see is a total chaos, more like what we saw in July of 2021. We don't want a repeat of that kind of chaos.
That Vavi, let's leave it there. Much appreciated. Thank you very much for your time. Zwelinzima Vavi, General Secretary of Saftu.